What happens when a high-profile guest completely loses control during a live television interview, forcing the host to make a shocking, unprecedented decision that stuns millions of viewers? You're about to witness one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the history of morning TV. Be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Michael Strahan had been hosting Good Morning America for years. He'd handled it all. Difficult guests, awkward silences, last-minute technical glitches. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on this particular morning. The show's producers were ecstatic to have booked Meghan Markle for an exclusive interview segment. It was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance, the kind that fills airtime and lights up social media. Meghan arrived on time, went through hair and makeup without a hitch, and even exchanged warm greetings with the crew. Her publicist submitted the usual list of approved topics, with nothing that seemed particularly controversial or off-limits. As Michael reviewed his notes in the makeup chair, everything felt like business as usual. The studio buzzed with the familiar hum of pre-show energy. Lighting was adjusted. Microphones were checked. Cameras rolled into position. 5 minutes to air. Michael took his place on the set, a pair of cozy chairs angled perfectly for a natural conversation. Framed by soft morning light and a table adorned with fresh flowers, Meghan settled into her seat, adjusted her outfit, and smiled as the sound tech clipped her microphone in place. Everything was running like clockwork. Then came the countdown. Michael switched into on-air mode. The same effortless charm and professionalism that had made him one of America's most trusted television personalities. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Strahan, and today we're joined by a very special guest. Please welcome Meghan Markle. We're excited to talk with her about her latest projects and initiatives. Thank you for having me, Michael, Meghan replied with her usual poised and polished tone. I'm delighted to be here. The first several minutes were smooth and on script. Meghan discussed her recent charitable efforts, upcoming ventures, and views on key social issues. Her answers were articulate, composed, and full of the grace that had become her signature. Backstage, the producers nodded with satisfaction. Everything was going exactly as planned. But then, something changed. Michael asked a follow-up question, an innocuous one, about how Meghan navigates interviews with different media outlets and what her approach is to varying interview styles. Meghan's tone shifted. Well, Michael, she began, her voice taking on a noticeably sharper edge. I think it's important to acknowledge that not all interviews are created equal. And frankly, not all interviewers are capable of handling certain conversations with the nuance they require. Michael held his composure, raising an eyebrow slightly but continuing professionally. Comments like that weren't unheard of. He leaned in, curious where she might be going with this. That's an interesting point, Meghan, he said smoothly. Could you elaborate? In your experience, what makes for a more effective interview dynamic? What came next stunned everyone in the studio. Meghan's expression turned serious. She leaned forward, her voice dipping into a tone that instantly shifted the energy in the room. What I mean, Michael, she said slowly, deliberately, is that there are interviewers who are equipped to understand and engage with complex, sensitive issues, and then there are those who are better suited for less demanding content. She paused. Sports commentary, for instance. The air went still. A silent gasp rippled through the control room. Michael's face remained composed, but his eyes briefly flicked to the camera, just enough for seasoned viewers to notice the tension behind his usually steady gaze. What happened next would become the subject of headlines, reaction videos, and millions of online debates. Requires a very different skill set than discussing matters of real social importance. The remark landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, the studio fell into an uneasy stillness. Michael immediately felt the energy shift. What had begun as a routine interview had veered sharply off course. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged anxious glances. This wasn't just going off script, it was spiraling. But Michael Strahan wasn't new to live television. He'd spent years navigating unexpected moments with grace and composure. Choosing to confront the comment head-on, he responded with measured professionalism. I appreciate that perspective, Meghan, he said calmly, though I'd argue that many of us in broadcasting have had the opportunity to cover a broad range of subjects throughout our careers. One of the things I value most about this platform is the ability to explore diverse topics and learn from the expertise of our guests. It was a fair diplomatic answer. But instead of softening her stance, Meghan leaned in, figuratively and literally. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Michael," she said, her tone growing sharper. "This tendency to flatten everything, to treat complex, nuanced conversations the same way you'd cover game highlights. When I come on a show to talk about issues that affect real people's lives, I expect to be met by someone who understands the gravity of the conversation, not someone whose primary experience is analyzing touchdown passes and batting averages." The insult was thinly veiled, if veiled at all. Michael's jaw tightened ever so slightly, a flicker of tension crossing his otherwise composed expression. He'd dealt with difficult guests before, but never one so openly dismissive of his background, live and on camera. Camera operators hesitated. Should they cut to commercial? Keep rolling? The studio was gripped in a strange, suspended silence. The only sound was the low whir of equipment and Meghan's increasingly pointed tone. "Meghan," Michael said, voice steady, "I think there might be a misunderstanding. We invited you here today to have a respectful conversation about your work and advocacy. I'm not sure where this hostility is coming from, but I'd be glad to focus on the issues you feel are most important." But rather than meeting him halfway, Meghan took his professionalism as a cue to press further. She leaned back in her chair with a sigh and a dismissive wave of her hand. "This is exactly the problem, Michael. This inability to engage in difficult conversations without retreating into generic, feel-good soundbites. It's this kind of intellectual timidity that makes certain media figures unfit to host serious discussions." The studio's tension snapped into something more palpable. The insult was no longer implied, it was direct. Everyone watching could feel it. Co-hosts at the main desk sat frozen, stunned. The floor director signaled frantically to the control room, unsure whether to cut away or let the chaos play out. Michael took a deep breath. His career had been built on composure, empathy, and adaptability, even in tense moments. But this was different. He knew that continuing to take the high road might only embolden this behavior further. So, for the first time that morning, his tone changed. "Meghan, I'm going to stop you right there," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "I've shown you nothing but respect since the moment you walked into this studio. I extended this platform so you could share your message with our viewers. What you're doing right now isn't just unprofessional, it's disrespectful. To me, to our team, and to everyone watching." There was a beat, a brief flicker of hope that the conversation might return to solid ground. But instead of dialing it back, Meghan appeared to take his boundary as a challenge. Her posture shifted forward, eyes narrowing, voice rising in pitch and volume. "Disrespectful?" she repeated incredulously, now clearly agitated. "What's disrespectful, Michael?" Meghan said, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Is pretending that all opinions and all expertise carry the same weight." She didn't pause, didn't soften. "What's truly disrespectful is expecting someone like me, who has lived through real challenges, who brings actual insight to the table, to sit here and play along while you ask surface-level questions and offer commentary that barely scratches the surface. That's not journalism. That's filler." Michael's patience was beginning to fray. Still, he drew in a slow breath, holding tightly to his composure. One more attempt. One more chance to steer the conversation back to something constructive. "Meghan," he said evenly, "I sure would if there are specific topics you'd like to address, or if there are particular questions you feel would bring more value to this discussion. I'm open to pivoting. This platform is here for you to share your message. But what I won't do is sit here and allow you to keep insulting me, my background, or the work of everyone who helps bring this show to life every single day." It was a fair offer, a professional one, but Meghan didn't see it that way. She leaned forward, eyes sharp and unblinking, preparing to land what would become the final, irreversible blow in the interview. "You see, this is exactly the issue with people in your position, Michael," she said. "You think that offering to change the subject somehow solves the deeper problem, which is competence. You're not just asking the wrong questions, you're the wrong person to be asking them." A hush fell over the studio. Cameras continued to roll, but even the ambient sounds, the quiet hum of lights, the distant shuffle of crew seemed to vanish. You can't just pivot away from being out of your depth, Meghan continued coldly. This isn't about topics. It's about intellectual capacity, and it's clear we're not operating on the same level. Michael's face changed. The diplomatic expression he had worn for most of the conversation fell away, replaced with something far more human, controlled anger. Quiet, intense, and unmistakable. He stared at her and then asked, voice low but unwavering, "Are you seriously questioning my intellectual capacity on live television?" A pause. "You're sitting here in my studio as a guest on my show and you're suggesting, openly, that I'm intellectually inferior to you." Rather than retreating, Meghan seemed energized by the confrontation. She sat back, crossed her legs, and gave a tight, almost smug smile, confident she had the upper hand. "I'm not suggesting anything, Michael. I'm saying it. There are people equipped to handle complex, nuanced conversations, and there are people who thrive in lighter spaces. There's no shame in knowing your limitations. The shame is in pretending you don't have any." Silence, pure and total. Everyone in the studio felt it. That she had crossed a line from sharp commentary into open, personal disrespect. The floor director hovered over the switchboard, unsure whether to cut the feed. The control room was flooded with overlapping voices. "Cut to commercial?" "Wait, no, let him respond. We can't just end it here." Michael's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. And then, with a calm born of years of discipline but an edge that made the entire room lean forward, he spoke. "Let me tell you something, Meghan. And I want you to listen carefully because this matters." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades. I've covered natural disasters, presidential elections, human rights crises, global tragedies, stories that have shaped the world we live in. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel laureates, frontline workers, survivors, activists, artists, and yes, athletes too, because their stories matter." Meghan opened her mouth to interrupt, but Michael held up a firm hand. "You walked into this studio as my guest. I welcomed you. I treated you with nothing but respect and professionalism. I prepared thoughtful questions, I gave you this platform, and I stayed patient, even as you systematically disrespected me this show, and the people who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make moments like this possible." His voice strengthened with each word, the audience both in studio and at home hanging on every syllable. "And now, after everything, you have the audacity to look me in the eye and call me intellectually unqualified?" In the control room, the decision was made. Don't cut away. Let him finish. This wasn't just a segment anymore, it was a moment. Michael rose slowly from his chair, his posture calm but commanding. Towering over Meghan, he no longer looked like a television host managing a difficult guest. He looked like a man reclaiming his dignity. His movement was precise, deliberate, and it shifted the atmosphere in the studio instantly. Meghan, who had held the floor moments earlier with sharp confidence, suddenly looked smaller, less certain of the ground she was standing on. When Michael spoke, his voice was low, steady, and laced with the authority earned through years of experience, and the quiet fury of a man pushed one step too far. "That's enough, Meghan. This interview is over." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word landed like a closing door. "Not because I can't handle difficult conversations or uncomfortable truths. I've done that for most of my career. But I refuse to provide a platform for someone who confuses arrogance for intellect and disrespect for discourse. You don't get to sit here and insult me and call it enlightenment." For the first time, Meghan looked rattled. Her eyes darted across the studio, perhaps seeking validation or even rescue from the crew. But what she found instead were blank stares and stiff silence. The room, once humming with quiet production energy, now felt like a courtroom holding its breath. She turned back to Michael, trying to steady her voice. "You can't just shut down an interview because you don't like what I'm saying," she said, though the bravado had thinned. This was supposed to be a professional conversation. Michael didn't miss a beat. "You're absolutely right," he said, eyes locked on hers. "It was supposed to be a professional conversation, but you made a different choice. You didn't challenge ideas, you launched personal attacks. You didn't push boundaries, you crossed lines. You didn't elevate the conversation. You tried to belittle the people having it. The tension in the studio was now electric, and every camera remained fixed on Michael. His tone didn't waver, but there was fire in his words. You insulted my intelligence, my background, my integrity, all while being invited onto this show as a guest. That's not bravery. That's just cruelty dressed up as critique. For a moment, Meghan looked like she might respond with more defiance. But her expression cracked just slightly. The confidence that had carried her through most of the segment was faltering. Still, she tried to push back. "Michael, I think you're overreacting," she said, a note of desperation now creeping into her voice. We were having a passionate exchange. Isn't that what makes for compelling television? Honest, unfiltered conversation that challenges the status quo. Michael shook his head slowly. No anger now, just finality. No, Meghan. What makes compelling television is mutual respect. It's a real exchange of ideas, not a one-sided performance designed to make someone else look small. He stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, but with the calm force of someone who'd had enough. You didn't challenge my ideas. You questioned my capacity. You told me I wasn't qualified to speak to you because of where I come from, what I've done, what I represent. Meghan opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words didn't come fast enough. Michael kept going, his voice now both calm and devastating in its clarity. You call that uncomfortable honesty, but what I heard was condescension. What I saw was arrogance, and what this audience witnessed wasn't elevated discourse. It was a masterclass in how not to treat people. The studio was silent except for the sound of their voices. Every person present, camera operators, producers, even off-camera co-hosts, knew they were witnessing a moment that would be studied and replayed for years. Meghan made one last attempt to reclaim the narrative. I was only trying to raise the conversation above superficial sound bites, she said, but even she sounded unsure now. Sometimes progress requires saying things people don't want to hear. Michael nodded once, a slow exhale escaping as he replied. That may be true, but there's a difference between challenging someone and diminishing them, between speaking hard truths and using a platform to prop yourself up by tearing someone else down. He stepped back slightly, his voice returning to its usual register, but the steel remained. You didn't come here to share insight. You came here to lecture, and when I wouldn't sit back and nod along, you attacked me instead. He turned slightly toward the control room. We're done here. And with that, the segment, if it could still be called that, was over. Meghan sat in silence, her expression unreadable now while the studio remained still. No applause. No otro music, just silence, and the lingering echo of a line that would be quoted in headlines for days to come. You don't get to insult people and call it progress. Back in the control room, producers scrambled, speaking over each other as they tried to decide how to manage the unfolding disaster playing out live on air. The segment had spiraled far beyond what anyone could have anticipated, and there was no precedent for what to do next. On set, Meghan made one final attempt to pull the moment back from the brink. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, had softened into something almost pleading, a far cry from the aggressive confidence she'd wielded just minutes earlier. Michael, please, she said, forcing a fragile smile. I think we've both let things get a little too heated. Maybe we just need to take a step back and try to find some common ground. I didn't mean to offend you personally. I could have chosen my words more carefully. But Michael was unmoved. The damage was done, and they were far past the point where polished language could cover the cracks. His expression was one of restrained disappointment, a man not reacting in anger, but responding from principle. Meghan, he said, each word deliberate, his voice calm but unwavering. The time for careful phrasing was when you first sat in that chair. The time for common ground was when I welcomed you to this set with respect and gave you the floor to share your message. You didn't take that opportunity. You came in here to provoke, not to converse. You made it personal. You made it hostile. And you treated this platform and everyone who works on it with outright contempt. He paused, turning briefly to face the camera, addressing the viewers, the crew, and perhaps the industry itself, before continuing. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a challenging conversation and a personal attack. I've interviewed people I strongly disagreed with. People who pushed back. People who questioned me. And I've always welcomed those moments because they were rooted in mutual respect. What happened today was not that. Meghan opened her mouth as if to respond. But Michael raised his hand gently, not to silence but to finish. His voice strengthened, filled with a clarity that cut through the tension in the room like a blade. You didn't come here to debate ideas. You came here to question my intelligence, my qualifications, and my right to sit in this chair. You used my show, my team, and my audience as a stage for your own performance. That's not discourse. That's just disrespect, and I won't allow it to continue. The room felt frozen in time. Meghan blinked as though struggling to absorb what had just been said. She looked around the studio, searching for support that wasn't there. Even the crew, typically neutral, wore expressions of discomfort, disappointment, and disbelief. "So what happens now?" she asked at last, her voice low, brittle. "You're really going to cut this short because you didn't like my tone?" Michael didn't flinch. "What happens now?" he said, each word clipped with finality. "Is that this interview is over. This segment is done. You need to gather your things and leave. I gave you multiple chances to conduct yourself with professionalism. You ignored every one of them. And I won't give you another opportunity to insult me or this team." For a beat, Meghan didn't move. Then slowly she rose from her chair, no longer the poised, self-assured guest who had walked confidently onto the set earlier that morning. Her movements were stiff, uncertain, her bravado replaced by a stunned silence. "This is unprecedented," she muttered, her voice caught between disbelief and indignation. "I've never been treated like this during an interview." Michael remained composed, his tone cool but resolute. "Maybe that's because you've never behaved this way during an interview," he replied. "Or maybe other hosts were willing to accept what I won't. Either way, this conversation is over." As Meghan gathered her belongings and headed toward the exit, flanked discreetly by a pair of studio security staff, the set remained still. All eyes followed her, but no one spoke. The silence was louder than any argument. Michael turned back to the camera, his posture composed, but the weight of the moment still visible in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue with the rest of today's show. Sometimes live television takes unexpected turns, but no matter what happens, we remain committed to upholding the values of respect, professionalism, and open dialogue, values we know our viewers expect and deserve." The camera lingered on his face for a moment, a portrait of poise under fire. Then the screen faded to commercial. In the studio, the quiet held for several seconds more. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone, on set and behind the scenes, was still coming to terms with what they had just witnessed. Not just an interview gone wrong, but a rare and riveting moment of live television where someone finally drew a line.